84% utilization within its potential user base. If we now take the cumulative sum of the rate of market penetration, formerly known as integration, we see the line drawn vertically from the 1 sigma point intersects the curve at the 84% point on the ordinate. This total population is shown as a shaded area. Let us now use examples for this 84% point to help interpret the concept of technology diffusion. Suppose you visited the front office of a large number of small companies. Would you expect to find a PC, a personal computer, somewhere in each of these companies? At least in California, the answer is surely yes. More than 84% of small companies indeed have computers. We can therefore say that computers have indeed been diffused into the small business market throughout the state. Would you say that you could walk into private houses across the USA and find computers in homes? That is, in more than 84% of the homes. It turns out that no, this is not the case, not yet. So the computer has not been diffused into the domestic market sector. In fact, at last count, only about 30 or 40% of all U.S. homes have PCs. This represents the innovators, the early adopters, and about half of the early majority population. This suggests that 40 or 50% of the home market is still available. If you walk into small manufacturing companies, would you expect to find robots in more than 84% of these companies? As yet, that's not the case. So robots have not been diffused into the small company manufacturing sector just yet. You can go on product considerations like this. The copy machine. Do more than 84% companies have copiers? Yes, indeed, they do. Therefore, that product would be defined as diffused. You can go into pharmacies and look for certain kinds of drugs. Some are diffused, and you can buy them in most any pharmacy. Some are still in the experimental stages, and you cannot purchase them as yet. Having addressed the magnitude aspect of the diffusion process, we will now consider the rate characteristic. Clearly, the concept of diffusion, a verb, implies an ongoing process. The time for that diffusion process is of critical consideration to the entrepreneur. If we look at the integrated normal distribution curve, we see that this curve represents the shape of the letter S. Formally, this curve is known as a sigmoid. We know the formal distribution really goes from minus infinity to plus infinity. The range of interest shown here is about plus or minus 4 sigma, which includes 99.9% of the population. In looking at the curve, you can see it starts at about minus 4 sigma and moves along, starting up and reaching 84% of its maximum at about plus 1 sigma. Notice that the curve starts rising very slowly at the left, reaches a point of about minus 1 sigma, and starts rising sharply. By the time it reaches plus 1 sigma, it again rises slowly. This curve is represented by an equation sometimes called the limit of growth curve, or the logistic curve. Based on the limiting conditions of growth, the S shape seems, in a logical sense, to be an appropriate curve. Nothing can start instantaneously. Nothing can go on forever. So we have the concept of limits of growth. Growth cannot continue without bounds. If one considers pure exponential growth, it will rise rapidly until some upper boundary inhibits further expansion. That upper boundary limit may be defined by market saturation, physical limits, or depletion of available resources. This resulting curve can be indicated as the S-curve or mathematically by the sigmoid. To gain just a little more insight into the market fundamentals, let's look quickly at the underlying equation. The curve shown here represent what is sometimes referred to as the pure birth process. The relation expressed by equation 1 represents the growth over time t of a population p with a rate of growth k. The solution of this first order differential is given as the second equation and is also plotted at the bottom of the chart. Notice on the little graph on the bottom of the chart that this curve is moving upward at an ever-increasing rate. It is growing exponentially. So realizing that the market penetration cannot go on forever without bounds, we have a problem. We have to modify this curve a bit. We modify it as shown by equation 3, the first equation on the next chart. We have now added a negative term, minus b times p squared, to equation 1 that reduces the growth rate as the population gets larger. You can think of the process this way. You put 2 small fish in a fishbowl. The next day, you have 4 fish. The next day, 8 fish. Then 16, 32, 64, and so on. Pretty soon, the bowl does not have the oxygen to support all the fish. The limit has been reached, and there is no more growth. The growth rate follows the sigmoid function. The solution for equation 3 is given as equation 4 and is plotted roughly on this chart. The effect of this added term is to limit the upper bound of the growth. This seems reasonable, since as the new innovation gains market share, there is less market share left for new growth, or in terms of the fishbowl, no more oxygen. Right now, the details of the mathematics are not too important, except for you to realize the result of this logic, that something has to start slowly, because nothing can jump instantaneously, up to a very high level. It takes time, if nothing else, and the laws of momentum indicate that we can't have instantaneous change or acceleration. So the curve starts slowly, grows rapidly, and finally hits an upper bound, as shown in the current chart. It runs out of resources. Equation 4 is a sigmoid function. Let us now turn to a real-world example of the process just described. This chart shows cable television system growth in the U.S. between 1975 and 1994. This is actual data collected by the industry over 20 years. If one takes the data represented in this chart and fits it using curve-fitting techniques that most computers are able to perform, you get the results shown in the next graphic. You will notice that the two curves, the actual data and the fitted sigmoid forecast, are very close. The equation shown in the bar across the bottom of the graph is exactly the same form as shown previously in equation 4. It seems we might be on the right track for forecasting market growth. At this point, we might ask, fine, but how does this sigmoid function impact the entrepreneur's business decisions? Well, let's introduce a concept called the window of opportunity and see how understanding that process will have some impact on decision-making relative to timing. Earlier, I mentioned that the normal distribution function goes from minus infinity to plus infinity. As a result, you have very long tails at both ends of the distribution. We have seen that the actual time for innovation to take place, from the invention to the time that it is first adopted in the marketplace as a new idea, and until we reach that technology diffusion point of 84%, can range anywhere from a low of maybe a couple of years to a high of perhaps 25 years or more. The problem can be seen in the next graphic. Let year 1 be the year of innovation, the first application of the invention. The abscissa is seen to span a period of 21 years. The product appears, in this example, to take somewhere around 17 to 18 years to reach the point where 84% of the market has adopted the innovation. Let the bar, labeled window, represent the point where the entrepreneur decides to enter the market. this is the new company's window of opportunity and will hopefully move to the right as the market matures, and accordingly, the company will grow with the market. If the entrepreneur enters the game too early, he or she will have a very long time to wait, perhaps 11 years, before the curve starts up. The price of admission to a new market at the outset, when the market is small and therefore little or no competition, is relatively low. For example, if I want to sell photovoltaic cells for the generation of household electricity, there's not much competition out there right now, and I could enter the market quite easily. However, it is expected over the next 10 years, as energy costs increase, competition will grow. If I wait too long, as the sigmoid curve goes up that steep slope, that's indicative of the fact that the market is growing, and the price of admission is getting much higher. So think of this curve as having a window of opportunity that is moving to the right. As market acceptance of this product increases, the price of admission also increases. It might be fair to say that even IBM, as large as they are, does not have the assets to get into the automobile market today. That window of opportunity is already closed. So the trick is, you don't want to get into the market too soon because it requires too much staying power, and that burns the meager resources that a small company might have available just to keep the doors open, since as yet there's no market. On the other hand, if you wait too long, the market has already grown too large, and the price of admission makes it unfeasible for the small entrepreneur to enter the market. The trick is, of course, to get in at just about the point in time shown in this graph, which is about year 9 or 10, where you cross the 20% point and the curve starts up very sharply. By entering in year 9, you only have a year or two before the market starts to sharply develop. That looks like a good entry point. The price of admission is not too great, and the market still has most of the expansion ahead of it. There is another dimension to this market of opportunity problem that affects the entrepreneurial company doing research on the development of a new product. In this chart, consider that the x-axis represents not time, but equal dollar increments invested per unit time. For example, $100,000 per month to support the product research and development phase. At the outset, money is being poured in, and there is no return on investment, no ROI, since neither a product nor a market exists. During this early phase, the investors need a great deal of confidence in the process to continue financial support. Notice in this chart there are lots of little increments along that x-axis. As an example, let each mark represent a $100,000 investment per month. We see that along the lower left-hand scale, there are a lot of 100,000 investments needed with no payback. An investor without courage might pull out from the company early on. Finally, if the research development process goes well, sales can start and the market will build. And now everyone is happy, hopefully making money and great expectations for continued growth create a corporate infrastructure by an ongoing market growth. However, the sigmoidal effect will start to set in over time. The existing corporate infrastructure now has a vested interest in projecting a continued growth pattern. This leads to a situation shown in this next graphic, where the projected growth exceeds the actual growth. The actual growth starts to follow the sigmoid function. When the sales rate of a product, process, or service stops increasing, a number of factors may be at work. Among the possibilities are market saturation and product obsolescence. At this point in time, the original product is vulnerable to attack from a newer and perhaps more innovative product. In this case, as pointed out by Richard Foster in his book Innovation, The older product, or the defender, is at a disadvantage compared to the newer product, or the attacker. The attacker, being innovative, is not inhibited by the existence of the old and perhaps stodgy infrastructure. In fact, the discontinuity created by the obsolescence of the old product allows the entrepreneurial company to introduce a newer and more innovative product. This innovation can swiftly gain market share. An impressive example of an older product being displaced by an innovative one is in the transition from bias ply tires to radial tires, as shown in the next graph. In one 18-month period, from about 1977 to the middle of 1978, the bias ply tires lost 50% of the market to radials in the U.S. Note that both curves have the general shape of the sigmoid, but one is going down and the other is going up. There are many examples where this technology trend can be observed. The development of commercial aircraft is an interesting example, shown here in this graphic. The Wright brothers airplane, invented in 1903, attained a top speed of about 30 miles an hour. Today, the Concorde flies at speeds of about 1,200 miles per hour. The envelope of this sequence of development can be seen to follow the sigmoid trend that suggests that commercial transport aircraft will reach around 1,600 miles per hour within the first quarter of the next century. Over the time between the Wright brothers' invention and the Concorde, several technologies were involved. These technologies included propellers, fan jets, pure jets, and even rockets. Each of these technologies followed the sigmoid. Each technology had its own upper limit bounded by engineering principles, and each was superseded by the next innovation. When all of these curves are laid end to end, they in turn produce a sigmoidal function. In case I have not yet convinced you that sigmoid functions are ubiquitous to new product and process endeavors, let's look at a group of home entertainment products that you are all very familiar with. If you look at all of these products' trends, you will see that all follow sigmoid diffusion functions. Notice that only VCRs and color television got through the 84% mark. Black and white television was on its way, but got pushed into obsolescence by color. Also notice that the times for these products to reach even the 50% of the market is long, more than 10 years on average. This brings me back to my original point. Time to enter the market is very critical for the startup entrepreneurial company. Too soon may be just as deadly as too late. Along that line, let me show you what Peter Drucker, a very well-known management consultant in the USA, said. There has been no case in history where the pioneer became the dominant producer. The most successful innovators, or the creative imitators, the number two. This may be unduly pessimistic, to be sure, the risks are high, but so are the rewards. Maybe Mr. Drucker is right. You may not want to be first, but you surely don't want to be the last either. One final point to consider when you take on the task of forecasting growth, curves, and/or new product introduction cycles. The Nobel laureate Niels Bohr observed, prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. My colleague and friend David Haigh presented some reflections and a checklist for entrepreneurs in a multinational setting. These fundamentals, plus a good sense of timing, are needed to enhance the probability of a successful business venture. It has been a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you, and I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schlesinger. Let us continue with the second question and answer session. Our first question is from Cuba. It is from Señal Internet in La Habana, Cuba.
Good morning. How do you think that the global networks can support or influence in the development of large investments in a very changing world environment where the borders are no longer there, and in a digital economy that is developing? That's our question. Thank you.
It's all yours.
Mr. Haigh?
Well, if I understand the question, I guess one way to approach this subject, it seems to me, is to start with small steps. The building blocks will become larger as we progress, but it seems to me that we don't always have to get overwhelmed by the idea that it's ITT or similar organizations that are the only ones playing this game. Smaller groups can be involved. I know this question comes from Cuba, for example, and I know that there are friends of mine from Canada who have started up investments in Cuba in recent years in the hotel business, for example. They didn't start out as huge organizations. They have become larger as they've progressed. So I ask all of us to remember that there is room, I think, in these situations for smaller and intermediate investors to be part of the process.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mexico. It is from La Universidad de Monterrey, San Pedro Garza Garcia, in the state of Nuevo León, in Mexico.
Our question is the following. In the graphic that you show that on the third year you reach the financial balance in research and development, don't you think that that is a sunken cost?
I couldn't hear the question.
No pude escuchar bien la.
What
We need the question
Necesitamos
repeated.
que nos repita la pregunta. The graph that shows that on the third year you have the break-even point, and then the return on investment and the return on that research and development, could this be considered as a sunk cost? Hay mucha interferencia de sonido.
Talking about research and development being a sunk cost.
Yeah, sure. Well, figure it any way you want. I mean, that's fine. Which graph are you looking at? Number.
We don't have the ability to get back to that. Let's talk generally about the...
¿Se recuerda el número?
Yeah, you can. If you want to do from an accounting point of view, if you want to view R&D as a sunk cost, that's quite all right. It doesn't affect the time to bring your product to market. It's still going to, from the time you do that till the time you get a market built up, is going to be N years, where N can be from maybe as low as 5 or 6 years to, on average, maybe 10 or 12. So with the financial, the way you run your bookkeeping has nothing to do with the technology diffusion process. I don't know if that's helped at all.
Okay, our next question is from Colombia. It is from La Federación Nacional de Comerciantes in Medellín, in Colombia.
Good morning. From FENALCO, Antioquia. This is the alliance with FENALCO, the Medellin University, and the regional channel, TV channel, have the following question. The foreign investment in Latin America has been relevant and very attractive, even with the uncertainties that we are living every day. How is this possible? Is this because of the cost that has been assumed by the risk? Is this minimized because of the profits that are realized in the end? Thank you.
Mr. Haigh, why do you think Latin America is such an attractive place to invest, given the level of risk that exists?
Well, many of the companies that go to Latin America go from what I would call a relatively developed economy, where their rate of return optimally might be, say, 12–15% annually. Whereas when they go to a more undeveloped region, their hope is that their rate of return is going to be more in the order of, say, 25 or 30% on their invested capital. So there is that incentive for them to do that. That's part of it. The other part of it is also, I think, that No company wants to put all its eggs in one basket these days. So even though they may be doing relatively well in a given jurisdiction, their home base, say, they like to have their risks and their potential advantages spread around. When one area of the world is down a bit, the other is likely going to be up. And so I think Latin America is viewed more and more as a real opportunity for companies that are highly developed and ready to move out.
Thank you very much. We have several people waiting, but we've run out of time, unfortunately. And if any of the people that were waiting would like to call, I think we could make ourselves available to answer questions after this session. So maybe you can just stay on the line. But thank you very much for your excellent questions. We have run out of time. Thank you again, Mr. Haigh, Dr. Schlesinger. We hope that you have enjoyed participating in this video conference, and thank you to all of our associates for their enthusiastic participation. The International Training Center will continue transmitting programs on topics crucial to improving our productivity and global competitiveness. We invite you to participate on October 15th, 1998, in the 10th program of our 1998 series entitled Advertising, Technology, and the Media: Essential Assets for Modern Organizations. For additional information on the International Training Center's programs for this year, please consult your participants' manual, where you will find the dates and specific topics for each program. Also, if you are interested in participating in training programs which will be offered by the International Training Center, please contact the center by letter, phone, or fax. On behalf of all of us who collaborate with the International Training Center, I thank you for your participation and interest in today's program. Thank you, and see you again soon.